Welcome to Morrison Madness.
Hello.
I have no idea what episode this is.
I don't know either.
And I feel like we've talked about some of this stuff before, but never all in one.
Yeah, I feel like it has popped up. And when we say, but that's another story. So now we're getting to the rest of the story. That's
but I feel like
Harvey
it's been
thing.
another story like several times.
Yeah.
On more than one occasion.
It could be. It could be.
So, we had some people ask about...
Yeah, we had specific requests for this information.
How we met. Right. We had somebody ask about when I proposed.
Yep.
And we will do that for a future podcast.
Right.
So this one is about how we met and how and when I asked you out.
Right.
Because there is a long time in between the two.
Yeah, there's a pretty decent time in between. Yeah. And there's it's a funny story overall.
Right.
So
we belonged to a social networking group.
Yes.
Right? It was not a dating group.
It wasn't supposed to be a dating group. People did end up dating in it.
The reason they said that was so that the two of them could have their pick of all of the single guys in the group. It was a mom and daughter who started this group. And then if anybody in the group was dating, they were kicked out of the group.
Yeah. And they were serious about that.
It was specific, and that's why. Because they wanted their pick of single guys.
Which is funny.
Don't delude yourself.
I know. Which is funny, but whatever. But they started this group on MeetUp, which is a website that's free. It's like Facebook, except you put in your zip code and then interest areas that you have, and you specifically are supposed to meet up in person to do stuff together.
So it could be like playing Dungeons and Dragons or wine tasting or horseback riding.
There was a bicycling meetup, all that kind of stuff. And this one was specific to singles, and it was supposed to be for people that were not interested in finding partners or dating.
It was supposed to be networking.
It was a networking, so then that way you didn't feel like you had to bring a significant other along to go to something. So we could go out to the movies, and it didn't matter. And we just did everything. We went to museums, we went to movies, we went out to eat, we did a bunch of different stuff together. But the whole idea was that it wasn't... A lot of people that were in there were recently divorced and were not interested in dating, were not interested in looking for anybody, anything along those lines.
Just keep telling yourself that.
Well, it worked for you, so what are you complaining about?
So I had been to a couple of meetups, and she was not at any of the ones that I had been to. Supposedly you'd been to several.
Oh yeah, I was at a lot of them.
Okay.
But yeah, you hadn't been to any of the ones that I had been to.
So then, end of July, beginning of August...
Somewhere in there, yeah.
There was a meetup at a restaurant bar.
Right. Just to eat.
In Coralville.
Right.
And I actually made my sister go with me. Because I was like, the first couple that I went to, like one got canceled, but not everybody knew. And so only like 4 or 5 people showed up. And then the other one, only a couple people showed up. And I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to be here. And I was recently divorced. And the last thing I needed to do was make another mistake. Right? So.
Well, you say recently, but recently was several years. It wasn't like you were like some of them.
It felt like the day before.
Well, it may have felt that way.
It still feels that way.
Ouch.
That was a train wreck. It was so like I still have PTSD. Just leave me alone over that one.
But there were people that literally like had signed their divorce papers while they were in the group. Like they were going through a divorce, and we would celebrate the fact that they had finalized their divorce. Like.
Yes.
So there were people like that. And then there were, 20 and 30-year-olds that moved to town that didn't know anybody and didn't have a significant other, and they weren't trying to find somebody to date. They just wanted to find a group of friends to go do stuff with and get to know more about the town. And so there was a whole mixture of people. That's what I was trying to get at. Well, some may have specifically joined because they wanted to date people. Not everybody there did. Anyway.
So anyway, we show up at this place, right? And there's all these tables pushed together.
There were like 25 people there that night.
Yeah.
And we happened to sit almost across from each other.
Right. And so my sister only stuck around for about an hour and then she took off, which was fine.
I don't even remember your sister.
It's all good.
I don't feel like she talked much.
A little. I mean, she straight up, as soon as we sat down, straight up told everybody, so my brother was afraid to come by himself. My older, bigger brother is afraid to come by himself.
Now that you say that, I think I do remember that comment. Which is funny, because I don't remember, it didn't stick in my head until you said it now.
And I specifically said to her, remember what happened the last time you left me alone at a party?
Oh, goodness.
It's true. I was with her and she left me alone at a tailgate for the Hawkeyes. So.
And do we get to know what happens, or is that a whole other podcast?
No, it's not even a podcast.
Oh, that's just an
obituary.
Story. It's an obituary. Okay.
So yeah, we're sitting across from each other, and I was kind of interested in you. You say you were kind of interested in me. The girl next to me was certainly interested in me, and then
the girl across from you, who was sitting next to me, was the girl that was really interested in you.
Well, she moved over and sat next to me at some point.
Yes, at some point, once people started leaving, then yes, she totally went around the table and sat right next to you, so you could have a more intimate conversation. Yes. And it was very clear.
She is a very nice, lovely person.
She is a very nice, lovely person, but it was very clear at the time that I was to start getting out of the conversation. I was not allowed in that conversation anymore.
It wasn't that clear to me. What was clear to me was that you had 2 boyfriends, and I didn't need to be the third.
So we should really explain that situation.
That'll take too long.
I'll
explain it, because if you explain it, it'll take forever.
Okay.
So they were both ex-boyfriends.
Correct.
One was out in town from Arizona.
He was the first boyfriend of mine in high school.
Yes.
So we hadn't even talked to each other in 15, 20 years.
And so neither one of us has big space issues. And so both of these...
No, we don't have personal space.
And we're usually friends with all of our exes.
Yes.
I mean, I have one that I'm not. All the rest of them I'm still friends with.
Right.
And so, they were all huggy with you.
Yeah.
And all up in your personal space. So it seemed like to me you had 2 boyfriends. And I was like, well, I don't need to be a third. I got more pride than that. Not much, but a little. I mean, I could have played second fiddle, but not third. So anyway, you made some comment about anybody that wants to come when we're done at the meetup that I'm running a karaoke show.
Yeah, that's when I was working for the other company. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, maybe they won't go. I'm like, I'm in. I'll go.
Right.
Yeah, I can, carry a tune in a bucket if it's not very heavy. And so.
And I was so excited that you were going to come to karaoke.
And then the girl next to me, Jen, she was like, oh, I'll go. You can ride with me. And I'm like, okay, great, because I've been drinking and I didn't have a ride. My sister dropped me off.
Right.
So it was fine, and it was. Where the hell was it? In Solon?
No, it was at the North Liberty,
the Legion in North Liberty, not
right.
Solon. Okay.
Right, which is on the way to Solon. So
right.
Yeah. And
so we get there, and every time I would try to talk to you, one of them was talking to you, right. or you were singing.
Right, because one of them. The high school boyfriend was in from Arizona.
Yes, and so you had a lot of catching up to do.
Yep. The other ex-boyfriend was a college ex-boyfriend who was back from law school and was living with me for the summer. So he hadn't gone back to school yet, so it must have been July or early August. Right. Anyway, so yes, they were both staying at my house. They didn't know a whole lot of people there, so they just came along for the ride. That's what they were doing.
So anyway, mm-hmm. I ended up dating Jen for a couple of months, and again, Jen is a very sweet, loving person, and Jen really did not want to have children, and so the fact that I had 3 kids, and not that she didn't like my kids,
right?
She just didn't want to be responsible for kids,
right?
So we parted ways. We're still friends. I mean, we still did stuff afterwards until she moved to Florida,
right?
We still stay in touch on Facebook and stuff.
Right.
Jen's a great person.
And I don't think you even know this, but while you were at karaoke, because I was running the show, it was hard for me to go over and talk to you. Because then I'd have to leave the computer and what I was running, because I'm running the show. But somebody picked a song that was a half an hour long, as people tend to do once in a while. It's not a half an hour, but a long song. And I knew it was a long song, and I was like, okay, I've got time. And I started heading to where you were sitting, and the moment I started heading to where you were sitting, you went downstairs to go to the bathroom, and I still headed over there, and I was talking with Jen, and Jen was telling me how interested she was in you, and how interested she thought you were in her, and then, but before you got back from the bathroom, I had to go back to my station. So I never did get a chance to actually talk to you.
And you know what's funny? I remember it was like Paradise by the Dashboard Lights or something, like a 13-minute song, right?
Yeah.
And I went downstairs to go to the bathroom, and on my way back up, I got trapped by somebody. I feel like I ran into a different ex-girlfriend or something. I don't remember.
Could be.
You know, and then they're just like, oh, who are you here with? And blah, 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 blah. And just, you know, on and on. Like, and I need to get back up. Yeah, and I couldn't, by the time I got back up there, like 3 more songs had played.
Yeah, it was
crazy.
a long time.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And then by the next time I had a chance to actually come and talk to you, you guys had left. Like, you didn't stay the whole night, which is understandable. But
right.
Yeah, so I tried. I tried to come talk to you.
Well, I lived in Iowa City, and she lived in, like, out in the country by Kelowna.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere between Kelowna and Wellman, you know. So, right. Yeah, we needed to go.
Right.
Yeah, and so then you and I didn't even see each other again. I don't feel like for...
We didn't have a way to even contact each other.
And I don't know that I went to... no, I did. I went to a couple meetups.
And I
you
did
weren't,
too.
And you weren't at the ones that I went to.
Nope, and you weren't at the ones that I went to.
So then in October they were having this big anniversary meetup.
Right.
So everybody in the group was going to be there, and they rented the upper level of the Vine.
Yep.
In Coralville. Mm-hmm. And so while we were there, even though Jen and I had amicably broken up, she came and picked me up and drove me there, because at the time I had been a stupid boy and didn't have a license. And so I was sitting at a table with her and another friend of ours, Julie, and another guy, and I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I don't know.
Pablo.
That sounds right.
And it was very clear to me that Jen was very interested in Pablo, which I thought was great for Jen. And then as the 4 of us are sitting there talking, we notice that you are over by the steps and you are in a heated discussion.
And this is clear across 2 rooms.
Yes.
Not just a room. Like, there's a doorway that you could see me through, and I'm clear across the next room even. And there were a lot of people there. So the fact that you could even see all the way across was surprising.
Yes. And you were in a heated discussion with some boy.
Oh, yeah, it was a heated discussion.
And so at our table, we had been discussing biting and whether or not biting, you know, was a good thing or a bad thing. Was it a turn on? Was it a turn off? And so when we saw that you were in distress, we discussed the fact that we needed to go rescue you. And nobody else was jumping up to do it. And I said, well, I you know, we can't just sit here and talk about it. So I will go save her. So I walked over to where you were at, and you were at the top of the stairs.
Yeah.
Leading down. And I put my arm around you, and I said...
And when you put your arm around me, you're right up next to me, and you're just a little taller than I am. So, like, your shoulder was over the top of my shoulder. Because that's important to know, especially for you that are listening in on this podcast, and you can't see us. Like, his shoulder is right next to my face, basically, at this point. And he's kind of at an angle, you know.
And the whole time that I'm talking to you, I'm staring at him.
Yeah.
And I said, so we're over at the table, and we're having a discussion, and I just have a huge shit-eating grin on my face. And he's just flubbered. He has no idea he's stammering.
Yeah.
I said, and so we want your opinion about biting. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And you...
I was so frustrated with the conversation that I was in, and I couldn't tell. Like, I honestly thought you just made that up. I didn't believe that you had actually been having that conversation at the table.
Totally been having that conversation.
I figured you had just made that up because you could tell that we were fighting and that you were going to come over and try and dissolve the fight or whatever, and, you know, in a weird way kind of deal. And I was so frustrated, and I thought it was so funny that I literally turned my head and bit your shoulder.
And said,
what do you think?
And I said...
Something along the lines of, I think I could be into it.
Yeah. and when I said that, I turned and looked at you.
Right.
And I said, I think I could be into that.
Right.
And then I turned back.
And I laughed.
And then I turned back and looked at him. And we won't mention his name to protect the idiots.
Right. And he said, well, I think maybe I should go.
No, I said, I think that's your cue to go.
Oh, is that what you said? I don't even remember. So, yeah.
And he said... Fine, I guess I'll go.
Right. And then you were like, all right, well, I'm heading over to the bar. Can I get you something to drink? And I'm like, I'll be there in 1 second. So, yeah. So then he left, which was fine. And then I came over and we chatted some more. And then we talked most of the rest of the evening. I mean, there was
Right.
some games and stuff where we
walked around and
interacted
talked with other people.
Right.
Right. And as the night went on, it got later, and a friend of ours in the group started a discussion about the fact that she had been on a date.
Well, now, before you get there, though, there were other components. So there were, like, it started narrowing down. A lot of people started leaving, stuff that way. So it was a smaller crowd, and we were all kind of grouped together, and we got into where we were telling stories.
Yes, and you brought up the story of going to Louisiana or someplace.
Right, so I was telling some
having
stories.
57 volcanoes, and I was like, "Will you marry me?"
Yes. So in this evening, which this is pretty much the second night we've talked, right? There was several months in between, but we had no communication, no conversation, what have you. And you clearly saved me from a very frustrating conversation earlier that evening and what have you. And as I'm telling stories, you would lean over and go, "Will you marry me? Will you marry?" 3 times. 3
But
times.
not quietly. Like I said it loud enough
No,
that people could hear.
Everybody heard it.
Yeah.
You know, and then at first people laughed. And then like by the third time, people were like looking at each other and giving each other the eye like, I think he's serious.
He's always serious.
So then our friend started talking about this date that she had been on.
Yes, and I informed her that it was not a date.
Correct.
So then she like had to try to defend the
Yes.
fact that it was a date, and she's explaining, well, he texted me and said, do you want to go to the Colonel's game? And then people like made her clarify, yes, but you had the tickets to the game, right? Because your brother works there, so you got in free. And I'm like, that is not a date. and then she was like, well, so we met there. I go, yeah, he didn't pick you up, not a date. And then they she got free food for them, and then he left.
Right.
Yeah, this is not a date.
It's not a date.
Girl.
No.
He used you to go see the game and get some free food.
Yes.
This is not a date.
Right. And so, but then when she was talking about the date, nobody knew how the date how it came about. Who asked who to go where or whatever. And so finally somebody goes, well, how did you decide to go on this date? Did he call you? Did you call him? And then she was like, he texted me and asked what I was up to, and I told him I was going to the game. And you were like, oh my gosh, totally not on a date. And then at this point, you were like, that is not how you ask somebody out on a date. This is how you ask somebody out on a date.
Right. So then, and again, we're in a big circle, and there's all these people standing there.
Right.
So I turned to you.
And walked through the circle straight up to me. I'm sitting on a stool with my back to the bar, and everybody's in a circle around. Yeah, I remember this part. Because I was like, why are you coming to me?
And I said, do you like sushi?
First you said, well, first I need to ask you a question.
Right.
Do you like sushi?
Right.
And I said, yes, I do like sushi.
And then I said,
will you go out to sushi with me on Wednesday night?
Right.
Next Wednesday night.
Right. Because I only had certain nights when I didn't have my kids.
Right.
So I couldn't just,
Right. It couldn't be next weekend because you
Right.
have your kids and you didn't want to wait, but you didn't have your kids the next week, Wednesday. So you wanted Wednesday night next week.
Right.
And I remember looking at you and going, maybe.
And 25 people went, oh. And I was like, damn. I mean, I remember taking a step back. I was like, wow, that was an epic fail. I mean, here I am trying to show Laura how a guy should be a gentleman and ask a woman out. And a woman is, definitely going to say yes to this. Because what's not to say yes to, right?
It was so suave.
Well, and I mean, I was funny and we've already had good interactions.
Right, you proposed 3 times by that point.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't expecting you to say yes to the marriage proposal, but sushi, I mean, just the fact that it was sushi should have been the seller right there.
But as soon as everybody groaned, I did clarify. So part of that was, and it had to have been close to when school was starting because we were preparing for our big opening event at the university, and I worked for the university at the time, and I was the activities coordinator. So our big opening event is a huge thing. Like the first year we did it, I worked 96 hours and 6 days. It takes a lot of time,
Right.
and we were preparing for it, and I knew we had a lot coming up, and I wasn't sure that next week how many hours I was going to have to work and whether or not I would be able to even go anywhere on a Wednesday night, or if it would have to be 2 weeks from now kind of thing. Not that I wasn't willing to go out to eat. I didn't know if I was available that evening.
Right.
So once I clarified, then everybody seemed a little bit better with it.
Yes.
But but yeah, that first time trying to ask me out wasn't an easy job, was it?
No, it certainly was not.
Was it worth it?
Yeah.
You had to think about it though.
Well, so the best part was that, so because Jen was so interested in Pablo, she asked me if I could get a ride home. I'm like, yeah, I ought to be able to get a ride home. I mean, somebody here can. So, so after all of this stuff had happened, she's gone. And then I'm like, hey, Jen drove me here. She left. So then I asked you if I could get a ride home.
Right. Yes. And I just realized I totally said something incorrect. It was in October. We had our fall program where we were giving away the awards ceremony that next Friday, and I didn't know that's
Right.
what it was. I had it mixed up with August because the first
Right.
meeting was in August.
Yeah.
So X-nay on the big event, even though that was a thing.
Right.
This was in October, which we were having our fall award ceremony, and I was still in charge of it. It's still a big thing, and I just knew I had a lot to prepare, and I wasn't sure that I would have time to
So
go.
after you clarified and said that if you were free, you would go.
Yes.
Right? And then everybody's leaving. It's like 1 o'clock.
Right.
And I've been drinking Long Island's. Even if I had drove, I shouldn't have been driving at that point.
Right.
So you're giving me a ride home. And on the way home, I convince you we should stop at a bar that's not very far from my house.
Yes, and I almost left you at the bar.
I may have gotten in an argument with somebody about who the greatest guitar players are.
May have gotten in an argument?
It's only an argument if they can back their side of the discussion up with any kind of fact.
Oh.
You can't have a discussion about great guitar players without Prince and David Gilmour.
The best part is that you lived in an area of Iowa City that I was not familiar with.
Yes.
And this bar was within walking distance of your house, which meant that bar was also not in an area that I was familiar with. Because if it had been an area I was familiar with, I probably would have left you.
It was a bit of a dive bar.
Well, it wasn't the fact that the bar was a dive bar. It was the whole
Oh, you couldn't
argument.
find your way back to the highway.
I couldn't figure out how to get back to the highway by myself, and the whole discussion that you were having, like this was not just a quick argument. This was like a half an hour heated discussion with this person at the bar, and I was like, why am I sitting here for you to argue with somebody about who the greatest guitar player is? I should just go home. Because I also had to work the next morning.
Right.
I had an event that I needed to be at 8 in the morning.
So the bar closes. You take me home.
Yep.
You come inside.
Yeah, you were all about, you're like, my kids aren't here, I can show you the house, you should come in. And I was like, okay.
And we end up...
I needed to use the bathroom. That was part of it.
So we use the bathroom, and then we end up talking on the couch.
We did.
Until 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And you're like, I need to get some sleep.
Yes.
I got to work.
Yes.
And I, being the gentleman that I am...
The best pickup line ever.
I said to you...
Well, I can't remember exactly how you said it. Something along the lines of...
I said, well, instead of driving home, why don't you just sleep here in my bed? I just bought brand new 1,000-count Egyptian cotton sheets. And you literally laughed.
And I flat out said, that might be the best pickup line I've ever heard. And then your response was, oh, it's not a pickup line. I promise it's really, they're nice sheets. I will sleep on the couch.
I saved up for months to buy those sheets. They're my favorite sheets ever. They're so amazing. Oh my, it's unbelievable. If we could get those sheets again for our new bed.
I know. We've looked. We can't find them.
So anyway, you slept on the couch.
I did. I fell asleep on the couch.
And I got up and made breakfast for you and let you sleep, and then I got you up with enough time to eat breakfast and still go home and
change
and
go back to work.
go back to work. Yep. And then we had our date on Wednesday.
I don't think, though, you even waited until Wednesday. I feel like you had a class at Kirkwood on Monday night, and on your way back from Cedar Rapids, you stopped at my house just to say hi, if I remember right. You couldn't even wait.
I couldn't.
So it was worth it.
It was worth it. So that's the story about how we met and how we started dating. There was a long gap in there from when we met and actually were interested in each other and then actually saw each other again. I mean, I know people that have gone years.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this was a good 2-3 months.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
And now look, 10 odd some whatever years later.
Yeah, over 11 since we met now.
Craziness.
And you can still put up with me.
Yep. And we still like sushi.
We do still like sushi. Yes, we do. Well, should we call it?
Yeah, I think that's enough of that.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. Make sure that it helps us out greatly if you're sharing it. We want to meet more people and hear other people's stories as well. Tell us about how you and your significant other met. That's always fun to hear. Those are good stories.
Yeah, and if there's anything else about us that you want to know, please, put that in one of the comments. I mean, we're always looking for things to talk about. Like we said, somebody asked us about the proposal, and so that's one that we're definitely planning on doing here in the future.
Yeah.
But, definitely connect with us somehow on social media, comment on YouTube, share our stuff. If you think there's somebody else that might find it interesting, share it with them.
Subscribe, like,
Absolutely.
all those kinds of things. All the things you've already heard 1,000 times, but they really are helpful.
Yes, they are.
And it helps us to know that you're watching, because just because you watched it doesn't mean that we're seeing that you've watched it or anything that way. Right. So sometimes you have to subscribe for us to see it. And the comments are gold to us, at least to me. Because again, the whole reason I enjoy doing this is connecting with you guys. So definitely comment.
And hopefully things are getting better for everybody out there. And pretty soon, maybe we'll be back to doing live shows, and you can come up to us at one of our shows and be like, "Hey, we heard your podcast and we loved it," or "God, you guys are horrible. Don't do any more of it." Stick to Name That Tune. Whatever, you can't be good at everything. So
it's true.
Stay in your lane. Until next time.
Take care, guys.